Recording
later on.
started.
Okay.
Hey, everybody, welcome you to this week's Matrexit discussion group call for tactical sovereignty. And this week we have a friend with us. Waterfront Jim is what we're going by.
Hey, Brian.
And how you doing?
Doing great.
There's been a lot of discussion over time regarding whether or not, your juridic person is a separate person, or some people call it the straw man. I prefer not to call it the straw man. I prefer to call it what they call it. They call it a registered organization. And a link for that will be down in the notes below in the description box here. But we've kind of been looking at things from that direction. I mean, judges have even referred to it as it. Some have even said that you need to unlatch from it. Some I've even heard of judges referring to saying, do you want me to kill it for you? But life may be difficult for you to operate. And so looking at things from that perspective, that this is a separate entity altogether. Some people say it's a dead entity, which is not true. That's something more along the lines of something that's uneducated would probably say. It's technically an artificial entity. There's a big difference between artificial and dead. Something that's dead would have at some point needed to have the capacity for life. It had to breathe. It had to bleed at some point. Well, an artificial entity doesn't. And so an artificial entity is nothing more than, say, like your Pep Boys auto store. That's an artificial entity. A business is an artificial entity. And so that's really how you're viewed. You're viewed as being the agent or the representative for this organization. And so the direction I've gone is just resigning as agent for their organization, then creating my own and handling things from that point of view. Because, well, we know that where they have control is over what they create. What you create, you've got control over. You can't go next door and tell the neighbor's kids what time to go to bed. You didn't create those kids, all right? Or those children, I should rather say. But you can tell your own children what time to go to bed because you did create them. Same exact concept.
Right.
And that's where their perceived view of authority comes from, is that it is their organization. They created it. They're going to rule over it. And they may even come down hard on you if they think that you are doing something that is not healthy for the organization, if that makes sense. So when somebody gets busted for something, it's not necessarily, they're saying, oh, you committed this crime or that crime. That's not necessarily what the case is. What they're really looking at is that you're doing things that will not be beneficial to that organization they created. And so, therefore, they're going to bust you. Well, anyway, Jim here has had a very similar experience, and what's nice is actually doing things, seeing results from them. That way you know what's going on. And one of the more simple things, although it doesn't feel simple at the time, one of the more simple things to deal with this on is with traffic situations or vehicle stops. And I'm going to let Jim pick up from there. How are you doing tonight, Jim?
Hey, I'm doing wonderful, Brian. Yourself?
Excellent. Great to have you here.
Thank you. A lot of y'all out there probably know me from last decade as Beach House Jim when I was down in Florida. Well, a lot of crazy stuff went on when I was helping people beat foreclosures and all. And the deep state, we didn't have that word yet in our lexicon, but they kind of came after me and Lisa. The whole stories that I think you put a link up years ago about freejimandlisa.com. That website's still up there that has the stories, has all the paperwork in there. But I've been kind of laying low, got out of Florida, liquidated everything I had down there, and I've been going up off grid in the mountains of North Georgia and just kind of laying low for a number of years. But I can't unlearn what I already know. And I did stumble across, and you were 100% right on your intro on this thing, is that they've created an organization. And before I get into a little bit and talk about agency and what transpired, I just want to underline some stuff that I had discovered along the way. This organization, this entity, is a sort of trust, and that is backed up. If you go look at the Proclamation 2039, signed on March 6, 1933, by FDR, he starts off and he talks about that special trust accounts are to be created. And then it goes on later and it talks about on the Act of June 20th, 1935, the Social Security Act, signed into law on August 15th. They say, whereas Congress, under the constitutional authority, created special trust accounts on the Act of June 20th, 1935. Now, there's an old saying in another law book that says, let the dead bury the dead. And artificial entities don't have beating hearts and belly buttons. And the question that comes up, it says, first is, what is my relationship to this entity, this all capital letters name and that number that they created? If it is a trust, those of you who are familiar with trust law know that there's a lot of different roles you can play in a trust, but the three biggies are a creator, a trustee, and a grantor or creator, a trustee, and a beneficiary. Well, you didn't grant anything. You didn't create it. You didn't put anything into it. This was all created when you were a baby, and they did it. They created this entity, and they created a name that sounds like something and gave you a piece of paper to call yourself that. But are you that? Are you an artificial entity? Well, clearly you're not the trust, and you're not the grantor. They did that. So are you making decisions for that entity? Well, frankly, if you've tried to do anything with it that way, you'll find out you're clearly not. You don't have legal title to it. Legal title is held by the trustee. And we'll get into who the actual trustees of that entity are. And then really, some people would say, well, when I hit 65, I get benefits, but you're not getting benefits now. And benefits can be created, moved, destroyed, bundled in other accounts. They can do whatever they want. It's their entity. And you don't want to trespass on somebody else's property. Let them have their entity. What's important is understand your relationship to it. All right, so we know that the trustee is the principal. And there's some expectations that they have when they give you this piece of paper. And it seems that as I went through it and I was studying under another guy out there, Pastor of the Way, he and I made friends. You've had him, I think, on your show before, Brian. Great guy. And he was talking a lot about agency and that basically we got a piece of paper from the Social Security Administration on their letterhead that clarified and said that, and I'm reading it, and I could probably share this with you if you allow me to redact it and put it all up. But they said our indicates record Social Security number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is assigned to all capital letters name. He's listed as legal representative of this number. Actually, it is in all capitals, upper, lower. He is the legal representative of the number. Legal representative, is that a principal? Is that the owner? Is that the one with legal or equitable title? No, it's a position of agency. Basically, you have an apparent agency position. And when I describe how I dealt with this stuff, as we're going through it under corpus juris secundum, it goes into great detail about the laws of agency. But the agent has one duty, one basic duty that they have to perform, and that is full knowledge and disclosure to the principal. If that duty is performed, the agent is not liable. The agent is not liable. Okay. That said, I recently had a little encounter. As a lot of you know, that I don't do driver's license. I haven't for over 10 years. I travel by right, and I did some stuff with plates, but that has mixed. I'm not real thrilled with the results of some of that stuff. I have some issues with the way that's handled. But, so I get pulled over. And I'm tootling around in my mom's pickup truck. And this officer, he, I guess I took a left-hand turn and crossed a double yellow that gave him the presumption that it's okay to turn on his lights. And I pulled over in a parking lot of my church. And of course, I got my camera running. It's always good to film any interactions with guys with badges. Just always film. It's your First Amendment right, freedom of the press. So I immediately asked name and number and reasonable articulable suspicion of what crime, and he indicated that it's a third-class misdemeanor to go cross a yellow line or whatever. And so my first thing is that I'm reticent about not contracting. I don't consent, and I'm not going to engage in a contract, and certainly not. I'm not going to consent. I basically said, look, I'm not going to provide identification unless you threaten me with incarceration. I'm not here to rebel. I'm not here to fight back. I'm a peaceful man. I'm here to fulfill the peace. I'm a bringer of the peace. But you have to threaten me. So are you going to put me in jail if I refuse to provide ID? He said, yes, I will. I said, great. I said, okay, now that you've threatened me under color of law, 18 USC 241 and 242, qualified immunity. But I just wanted to throw that in there because it is being recorded. Go read it. But okay, under color of law, he's going to deprive me of my right. And under threat, duress, and coercion, I'm going to be as cooperative as possible because he's got the gun and I don't. So I happen to be a ordained pastor, and I have a pastoral ID that basically has my Christian name, the first name dash middle name. I don't put the last name on there because that's not my property. It's owned and shared by a lineage, by a house or a family. It's a family name. But I gave him that as an ID, had a picture on it. And he was like, I want you to sit in the back of my car. I said, again, I can only cooperate if you're going to put me under threat and duress coercion. Well, they went in, ran fingerprints, and it popped up as that all capital letters name on the birth certificate. Imagine that. They didn't want to use the ID I gave them. But again, when they wanted me to sign some tickets, here, we want your signature down here and down there, I wrote under duress. It basically refutes that I'm engaged in a contract and that I consent in any way whatsoever. You cannot give consent in contract when you're under threat, duress, or coercion or coercion. So at this point, that's all it took, and then to get bailed out. And then, time started going by. So here's the thing. I'm clear that my role, I've been operating with apparent authority or implied agency as the general agent by the agency or principal that owns the name. Who owns the name? Well, we just talked a little bit about the U.S. government, and they created the Social Security Administration. And if you go into, you can look on, let me see, I got a copy of it right here, on ssa.gov, and you look for the signatories to the trustee reports. If you want to go direct there, I can read off the URL here. It's http://ssa.gov/OACT/trustees, plural, .html. And it says right there, every year they update that, of who are the trustees of the trust. Now, the trustee is the principal, right? So my job, if there is an implied agency, is to give urgent notice of any claims being brought against the principal's property, against that trust property, against their trust. My whole goal is to be non-liable. I'm not the name. I have no contract. I don't consent. So I crafted a letter, and if you'd like these letters that I came up with, I can share them with you. I'm a little bit. I really hope that people read and study law to create their own letters in their own words, because your actions need to be written on your heart. I've seen too many people that have taken my materials and gone into a court and think that it's some magic bullet they just hand the judge, and you know that we've talked about this before, Brian, that you do that and the judge is going to test you a little bit, and if you don't seem to know what you're talking about, then you're just masquerading fraudulently in that courtroom and playing cute games, and they're going to throw the book at you. So my letter, I sent this off to the four trustees. The primary one is Janet Yellen, managing trustee, care of the Secretary of the Treasury in Pennsylvania Ave in Washington. Second was Julie A. Sue. She's the Secretary of the Department of Labor. Again, this is effective as of this recording, but you need to go look up who they are currently if you're listening to this a year later. Javier Becerra, that's the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, also in Washington, D.C. And Kilolo Kijakazi, that's in the fourth trustee in Baltimore, Maryland. So I said, okay, here's what we've got to do. I've got to do the administrative process. How many of you guys know the 3 steps of the notice of default, and opportunity to cure? I started the administrative process because silence is assent, and all too often these guys, you send them stuff and they remain silent. So you gotta make you gotta create a paper path of your acts and actions and performing your sole duty as the general agent of their trust. I will read real briefly a little bit. It's a brief notice. I do start off, Dear Janet Yellen, at least in the letter to her, it's my sincere belief that the name, all capital letters, which I have been using, was registered by the United States and is the property of the United States and is therefore not my property, and in fact has never been my property since, to the best of my knowledge. I had no role in that process. It is my sincere belief they can't come after you for your beliefs, that I have been operating with apparent authority or implied agency as the general agent for the agency or principal that owns the name. I was never given proper instruction on the limitations of the use of that name, nor of my duties and obligations ordered or trespass on the property of the owner. If my belief of the process I'm using to fulfill my duties as general agent are incorrect or incomplete, I request your response within 14 days of receipt of this good faith notice. Now, when I served it on them, the rules of service vary from based on your state. So I did I did cite in there about Georgia Code 1061 when agency relationship arises, showing my reason for believing that I'm the general agent. I mentioned also Georgia Code 14-2-504, service on a corporation, where it said that it's adequate to send certified mail with a green card, return receipt requested, to the principal or principals. So I did it to all 4. And in accordance with Georgia Code 14-2-857, and this is an important one, indemnification of officers, employees, and agents, it clearly says that it's general agent. When I perform that duty, I am indemnified from liability. Folks, look those up in your own state if you decide to go down this path of standing as merely an agent for something that isn't yours. So I sent that off, and I got it. I signed it and sent in copies of the citations they generated. At the post office, I paid to have them sent out, and I make sure they stamped each of the post printouts, the stamps or whatever on each of the envelopes. I also kept a tracking report showing they received it. And I never got the green card back. So I went into the post office and I said, hey, here's the tracking report. And they were happy to give me a printout of the signature on the back of the green card, which they stamped with their little red date stamp, showing that process had been served on that first letter. I let time go by. I let a couple of weeks go by. And I started the second letter. I gave them also an added few days to as a grace period. You know, I'm into grace. I get grace, I'll give grace. And the second letter, of course, as you guys are familiar with the administrative process. The next one I titled called Notice of Default, Probable Cause, and Estoppel by Acquiescence with Opportunity to Cure. Basically, I recited some stuff from before, and I said, the affiant therefore certifies that there's no response has been given or other documentation filed in response to the affiant request. Accordingly, I now invoke the doctrine of estoppel by acquiescence, as I can prove respondents, they have a fiduciary duty as the primary Social Security Board of Trustee. It's upon them, they have imposed a legal and moral duty to meet and confer, but they remain silent, and it could be construed as fraud. That I cited silence can only be equated with fraud when there's a legal or moral duty to speak, or where an inquiry left unanswered would be intentionally misleading. That's U.S. versus Tweel, 550 F2D 297 299. That's a 1997 case quoting U.S. versus Prudden, Prudden 424 F2D 1021 1032. It's a 1970 case. I go into a little bit about silence. I talk about my agent notice principle, and that I give them opportunity to cure and let them know that if you don't cure the fault, you don't come forward as an operational law. By operational law, all interested parties then by their silence agree entirely and without exception by way of tacit procuration of silence and silent assent. And the whole matter shall be deemed res judicata and stare decisis. Do not ignore this, big bold letters. Okay, so then I did a verification. Again, when I sign this stuff, the signature I use is not it's my pastoral. I'm in my limited capacity, and I do that with the signature by signing as James Bernard, first middle, comma, pastor. That shows that I'm from a foreign venue. I'm basically, at least I didn't write in there 2 Corinthians 5:20. I'm an ambassador from a foreign kingdom, because they don't recognize that ambassadorship in their courts or tribunals. And comma, general agent for the trust. So everything I do, I'm in my limited capacity as a general agent for their trust. I'm not going to argue about whose property that is yet. I was prepared to, if the judge says, well, are you this and are you that? I even brought in a Social Security card that I haven't, that I dug out of an old folder. I haven't used the thing for over a decade now. But if you're familiar with that card, if any of you have such a card issue for you to hold, it has the all capital letters name on the front and shows who the owner of the trust is on the back, because it says, if found, it doesn't say send it to Jim. It says send it to U.S. Government Social Security Administration, and they have a little address. That right there shows who is the principal, who is the grantor and trustee, and only they know who the beneficiaries are, but I'm certain it's not me. So I resent the second letter along with a copy of all the first stuff and the proof that they received it, and never sent me a green card back, but they signed a green card. Like I said, now I'm going to give you 30 days. The reason I did is because I went in for the first hearing after the second letter. Actually, I did. I think I did. Yeah, I did 30 days here, but they had sent me a notice, I think because I was recording and I didn't sign any tickets or anything. I just wrote under duress. And obviously, I think they knew there was a curveball. So this May appearance got pushed back a little. So I had a little more time. I'm going to give more grace and more time to the trustee to please instruct me and to reply. Which, a spoiler alert, yeah, they never did. But a couple of interesting things. Now, the first hearing was an arraignment for the name. In Georgia, where I was at, when you enter the courtroom, the prosecutor or a solicitor general, I don't know what her title is, cute young lady, she's friendly with everybody, but and she was okay with me at this point. But she's like, everybody come on in and sign in. Oh, okay. So I went up there to their little yellow pad and took the pen and I wrote the all capital letters name like it appears on their ticket. I put a box around it to separate it off on the document. And then in front of that, I put the word for. I handwrit it, script with the colon. So I'm there for that name. Okay. She did pull me aside and she said, is this you? Wait a minute. Is this you signed in? What does this mean? And I said, well, all my evidence here shows that I'm merely a general agent for somebody else's property as so named on all these tickets. And she was like, well, what do you want to be called? And I said, I don't know, peaceful inhabitant, amicus curiae, or if you want, just general agent is fine. And she, suddenly she didn't like me. And she got very kind of cursed and gave me these hairy eyeball faces. Well, I was one of the first ones to go in there and write on that yellow pad. So I was at the top of the list. But they went through, and as to be expected, like I've been doing this stuff since the 80s, y'all. So as it's always been since back doing the old sovereign citizen yellow fringed flag and the straw man Straminius homo arguments. I've done it all. I'm a guinea pig on myself. They always seem to save me for last. They'll call everybody else and get the courtroom empty before they call my case. So I've always learned, because some of the stuff they've pulled, I never go into their courtrooms alone. I always bring in 2 or 3 people with, that may or may not have recording devices on them, but are ready to sign the affidavit saying that I appeared. If they want to, I've gotten failure to appears. I've got all sorts. They play games. But so I protect myself by going in with friends who will be firsthand witnesses and can do affidavits and that kind of stuff. Well, before I'm sitting there kind of alone with my 3 friends, and the judge gets up from the bench and he walks in the back room with a yellow manila folder under his arm. And I said to the prosecutor, I said, hey, I said, the judge is gone. I said, so I appeared, and I guess he's not going to call my case today. Am I free to go? And he goes, oh, no. He'll be back in a minute. He's about to call your case. Okay. About 15 or 20 minutes later, he reemerged and called the case. And very interesting how this whole thing transpired. I don't answer questions. I always turn it into a question, because that's how you remain in honor at all times. You can't go on into dishonor asking questions. So he goes, all right, James, he calls the all capital letters name. And I stood up and I said, well, I'm here for that matter, Your Honor. And he says, you want to come up to the podium, please? And I said, well, do you mind if I cross the bar and come to your podium? Permission to come aboard? I didn't say that way this time. And he says, yeah, come on up. He answered my question. And he goes, all right, it looks like you are being charged with, driving across the yellow line and driving without a license. And I said, wait a minute, Your Honor, these charges, I'm not sure where it says that I'm being charged. it seems to be charging government property. The guy got belligerent. He said, stop, 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 stop. He started yelling, stop at me. And he says, well, you know, Mr. I said, wait, Mr. You know, I go, excuse me. I didn't ask you to address me as Mr. anything. You can call me General Agent. Stop, 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 stop. Boy, he didn't want to hear anything. And then he went on to, you know, he would pontificate a little bit about this and the other and crimes in the court and blah, 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 blah. And he says, so are you prepared to enter a plea at this point? How do you plea? I said, well, in my limited, you know, it seems I have limited capacity and the principals have not given me as the agent any indication that I have any authority to enter any plea on their behalf. Stop, 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 stop. It was funny. He kept wanting to silence me. And it happened again. And he's like, well, I think this court's going to go ahead and enter a plea of not guilty in your behalf. I said, what, my behalf? And he goes, yeah, we're just going to set a trial date for blah, blah, blah for you to return. I said, so let me get this straight, Your Honor. Since you're entering a plea on behalf of that entity, does that make you a co-trustee? Are you the trustee now? Stop, 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 stop. Boy, oh boy, he was having nothing to do with anything, any questions coming out of my mouth, any comments, questions, nothing. He wanted silence. So whatever, I left the room. Now they kicked the can and they added on another month. So I had plenty of time to complete the third letter. And the third letter is very similar to the second letter, where let me pull it out and I'll go through a little bit of it if you don't mind. Letter 3, again, is now the second affidavit of notice of default, probable cause, and estoppel by acquiescence with opportunity to cure. And I stepped through that. I'm sending both of these letters. I'm still certified there's no response. I showed that they signed the green card. They're getting the notice. You have an obligation to come forward, and they're remaining silent. So I invoked again the doctrine of estoppel by acquiescence is I can prove respondents' fiduciary duty that as the primary Social Security Board of Trustees member, it's imposed on them a legal and moral duty, just like before, to meet and confer, but their silence now must be construed as fraud. Now, a lot of the stuff I put in there was second, but, you know, and I gave them a third chance, and I said, if you haven't received any of the past 2 letters, I know you have, but I know you're very busy, but you know, you got a little time, but after this, it's a stopped. So I did all 3 letters. Now, I know this much, that if you give those guys too much time to see your argument, they're going to get you into one. And I never argue. I just ask questions. So what I did is I waited the day before the hearing. And this time what I did, let me get this, to make it appear, a lot of times they don't want to have any of this correspondence with anybody. They won't put it in on the case. But I put in a little cover letter. Nice little letter where I put the citation numbers on there as a memorandum to the court. Attached here were the 3 notices served upon the owner/principal of the trust that's named as defendant, all capital letters. The owner-principal has given many months and multiple opportunities to settle this matter and to confer and provide direction to proceed. Owner-principal has remained silent. See attached letters 1, 2, 3. In my limited capacity as general agent for said trust, my duties as agent have been fulfilled prior to the hearing scheduled for June 26th. I will be happy to appear in my limited capacity as general agent as my duties have been fulfilled in good faith. Again, any signature I have there is James the Dash Bernard, pastor, general agent for the trust. Another thing that happened the next day, I put it in at 4 p.m., right at the end of the day. And to make sure it was in the folder in time for the morning. And the next day, something that hasn't happened to me in 30 something years of trying all sorts of things. Aside from when I went in there, normally they have you do what? Go sign the little yellow legal pad. I walked up in there and the prosecutor steps forward and says, no, you don't need to sign. And I said, I just want to make sure there's witness that someone is showing up for the case. No, you don't need to sign. Huh, okay. Looked at my witnesses, make sure that they were getting copies of this. Because I suspected foul play. But something interesting happened instead. There was one attorney in there for some kid that wanted to plead traffic school. And of course, they give a professional courtesy to fellow attorneys, members of the bar, fellow agents of the court. They're agents. Nothing works. Artificial entities don't have a life of their own. They all need agents. The judge is an agent. The prosecutor is an agent. They're all agents. The attorneys are agents. Me too. I'm going to be an agent. I'm a general agent, or like you said before, special secret agent, special agent, whatever. I came in there. I'm in there in a limited capacity as agent. Now I was expecting to sit there for 3 hours while they called everybody else. But not my case, not the case that I was there for. They called it right off the bat. The prosecutor turned her back to me, hastened over where I could hardly hear what she was saying. I'm going to go and hire a court reporter transcripts. It's probably only going to be one page because I heard her just say something like the court has decided to dismiss this charge. We're not going to prosecute and dismiss nolle prosequi. The judge quickly said, oh, okay. And he turned and looked at me and he says, well, he said, the court has decided to dismiss all charges nolle prosequi, and you're free to go. I didn't miss a beat, but I was in amazement that they did me first, get me out of the way. Brian, I haven't seen this in 3 decades. I haven't seen this kind of behavior because they usually don't want me to do a seminar in their courtroom. I know they didn't want that, but they figured it'd be better just for me to get out of the way. And I did.
Well, you know what I think is happening? What I think has occurred there. Now, in my situation, since I've notified the Secretary of State for where I live in the state of my nativity that I am not an agent for their organization. It seems they won't ticket me. Haven't been invited into their courts or anything. But I think in your situation, what's happening, since you are addressing this as being government property, and you showed that you have fulfilled the steps that need to be fulfilled to do what's required of an agent, then they're going to take care of your case first and not have you wait because you are fulfilling your duty towards government property. If that makes sense. And so to delay you or anything like that would actually be a trespass against government property.
That's
and so, yeah, they just want to make sure and avoid all problems and cut and dried, see you later, bye.
Right. Whereas I know that your approach is a little different about revoking or resigning as agent. We talked a little bit about this. And I see merit in that approach as well. But I see a lot of possibility having come out of this. And now I'm going back and study, and being general agent puts me in an interesting position to do all sorts of other stuff on behalf of their property as principal in all sorts of other types of matters, foreclosures and liens and civil matters, criminal, financial, whatever it is. They clearly are not going to use my pastoral ID with the upper lower with a dash and my title is pastor. They're not going to use that ID, even though that's what they wanted and they did accept it. But I don't think they're really going to go there. And I think that it allows me to do interesting stuff. Maybe, I mean, I haven't messed with a Social Security account in over a decade and a half. And if I can go on a tangent for a minute, if you and the listeners don't mind, I found something very interesting because I went to the Social Security, I was doing the deposit. I set up a Treasury Direct account years ago. I did all this stuff, on my own and tested on myself to get a better understanding and to do what I understood to be right. And sometimes I was right, sometimes I was wrong, but it's a course correction. But I'm not going to help other people do something that I haven't done myself. That's and I never charge. I'm not a patriot for profit. I know you follow that. And Boris and I, when we were doing all the usufruct stuff a decade ago, we made a pact together that we would never charge to help people. And I kept true to that even today. But I had a situation where this I had been separated from my wife of 30 something years. She broke my nose, knocked me out in front of the kids, and I left her. And because I was going through cancer at the time, I went to live down on the beach. That's where where I was at in Treasure Island in Florida. And years later, when I was divesting and getting everything out of that name, I didn't have it in that name. I had it in land trusts. I used to teach trust law, trust to attorneys and realtors. Even I did trust seminars. When I was liquidating that property, she got wind and she filed for the divorce finally. And during the divorce process, she deposed me to produce 10 years of bank records for that name. And she wanted also the Social Security statement, a 10-year statement. Well, I know that number. I can access that account, I thought. But years ago, a side effect happened when I took that birth certificate and I did the process where I accepted it for value and then deposited it to the Treasury and the alien property custodian, that position, I think, Attorney General now. It was Obama at the time. I deposited to the Treasury for full and quittance and discharge under what used to be 12 U.S.C. 95A2 and 40 Stat 411. Codified the Emergency Banking Act of 1933 and the Trading with the Enemy Act, I believe it is, of 1917. Those are still in full force and effect, and they've been codified. And they're renewed from year to year, every 2 years, I think. But anyways, what an interesting had happened, because after I did that and deposited that to the Treasury, apparently the Social Security account was sealed. I found out because I tried to generate a report and I couldn't log in. Failed. So I called Social Security Administration. I said, hey, I'm trying to log in and print a report for this account. The little lady tried. And she goes, yeah, I can't seem to get in this account. I don't know what's wrong. You need to go in and talk to a supervisor in your local branch, which is in a town called Toccoa, Georgia, near South Carolina border. So I made an appointment, went in, and I talked to the supervisor and had a very interesting conversation where, she went in there and she has higher level access than the frontline people. And she's like, well, and I had at that time an old passport with that capital letters name. She wanted ID. So I had this old passport. I didn't get the state national passport or whatever everybody's into these days. I just had an old one that from years ago that hadn't yet expired, and I don't really use it. But there it is. I brought it in. This is 2018. 2019 when this went down. Well, I went in there and she was looking at it. She goes, well, this is weird. There's no activity on this account and it looks like it's been sealed. What did you do? I said to her, well, I told her, I said, all I did with a birth certificate, I was, studying the stuff about usufruct. And I took a security instrument, the birth certificate. I was calling it a security instrument back then. And then I deposited that security into the Treasury for full quittance and discharge, 12 U.S.C. 95A2 for Stat 411. Okay. She started laughing. She said, where did you learn that? And I said, a little bit of friends and trial and error. And it seemed to make good legal sense to me. Ignorance of law is no excuse. And she started laughing. She says, well, it looks like that worked. You're basically out of our, you're not active in our system anymore. And you've been, and I said, yeah, well, the IRS too. I had an encounter in 2012 because I stopped sending any forms in on 2009. That's another story. I think I've shared that on a previous call about 7 or 8 years ago with you, as Beach House Jim. But she started laughing and she said, yeah, the IRS. She said, yeah, we in the IRS, you know what we call that, going through that process and getting out of our system. And I said, what? And she said, what is it in the Bible about rising, flying through the air? What is that called in final days in Revelation? The true believers will be lifted and pulled out. What's that?
Yeah. I know the word too. It's not redemption.
Not redemption.
Gosh, I know it. Yeah, I know exactly what it is. It'll come to mind here.
Maybe Charles or one of our listeners might be able to put it into our text. Rising in the air, Revelation. Rapture. That's what they called it. Rapture. She goes, she says, yeah, we in the IRS call that process rapture. And I started thinking about that. And I said, imagine if you lived your whole life thinking you were a pewter doggy living on a Monopoly board, not understanding that you have everlasting life and that you're using a little game avatar that goes into the box at the end of the game. If you identify as one and the same, you don't understand the bifurcated nature and you think you're a pewter doggy, what happens in the day when all of a sudden people wake up and you start to see top hats and pewter race cards flying up off the board and disappearing? That's akin to what they're doing inside of the system, because they can't really see outside. All they see is that you fly away. So it adds a little bit of insight to those who are real literalists on biblical interpretation, that really it's written from their point of view. You're rising up off of their Monopoly board and just kind of disappearing. That account is not closed. It's just sealed. As I'm going through this and understanding with agency and talking with others that have worked with the Social Security Administration, Basilicos Nomos, our mutual friend, the pastor of the way over there, he added some insights into that. They don't close that account. It's their account. It's not mine to close, no matter what I send in and do. It's just sealed. And a part of that is also, I think, to protect themselves and to protect their own non-initiates in their own system. And that makes sense to me, but I that's my long way around saying, now I get this idea. If I'm merely in it as the authorized representative, aka the general agent for that name and that number, and that name and number still exists, but it's sealed, it should allow me to do some stuff. I'm open to ideas, but if that account is still there but just sealed, and I'm merely a general agent for the trustees, the principals who own that account, I might be able to serve notice on them and do the administrative process with, I don't know, other type of things that involve that name and that number. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's definitely very interesting. And, I'm thinking about that word sealed because they do have written into U.S. code the purposes for sealing something. I, a while ago, went and requested a FBI background check on myself because I'd done it once before, and it's kind of interesting the amount of information about different things that you get back, and you kind of see how they track you, for instance. And one of the cases that I had been involved with, I've mentioned it here before, but it was a felony case I was looking at. They told me 15 years. And the first attorney I had before I fired him, he said, "Well, you're probably going to do at least 5 years." And I was like, "Yeah, that's not going to happen." So I fired him, got a different guy, and to wind it up, it took a year. But the next time I had to go in court was a year later. The attorney called me up and said, "Okay, you got to go in tomorrow, Brian. We're gonna finish this." And I went in, and the prosecution made like 2 or 3 offers to me. I refused all 2 or 3 of those offers. And then the judge said, "I've got a full docket today. I don't have time for this. I'm going to send you over to Judge so-and-so." So I went to Judge so-and-so's chambers, or to his courtroom, and we followed the bailiff in. And when the bailiff walked in, he turned on the lights. There was nobody in there. And we went up there to the desk and stood there, and the judge, the court administrator, came out from the back, and he made another offer to me, which I refused, and made a second offer to me, of which I refused. And at the end, he turned every shade of red and spitting and this and that, and yelled at me to get out of his courtroom. And we walked out, and I said to an attorney there, I said, "So what now?" And he said, "Go and sin no more." And when I saw that case listed on the FBI report, it said it was sealed. And I thought, oh gosh, why would they seal it? And there is a code that they listed there, a couple codes actually they listed there, which give off a lot of random reasonings for sealing a case. One might be if it's a minor, they're going to seal it because that's not public information for a minor. Other ones were kind of sounded like if the courts had not produced the evidence needed to file initial charges against you, they would seal it. And so to me, it was kind of like, okay, they're kind of hiding their own lack of capability is what they're doing. You know what I mean? And no, this kind of reminds me also of people going and getting like things expunged from their court records. And, you can go and get things expunged, and that just means the average Joe can't find that information about you online. But somebody that has the credentials, like a police officer or, say, the courts, they can pull that information up. It's not totally erased for everybody. And so that's kind of what the sealing sounds like to me. Like, yeah, it's still there. And I would be very fascinated to see what can be done with that in that kind of a situation. And at the same time, also, I want to remind people listening, you listen to the words that, which was Beach House Jim, it's now Waterfall Jim. The things Waterfall Jim has mentioned about the process he did and what was said in court, but also pay attention to what wasn't said. Right. He didn't yell about the gold fringe flag. He didn't yell about a straw man. Nope. Or request anybody's oaths of office or nope. Any of that patriot guru nonsense that everybody tries, and it always fails for him. He went right to how the system operates, learning how the working parts are working and operating, and attack it from that standpoint. And that, to me, is the only legitimate standpoint to come from, because it really is an agent and a principal relationship. I said before, you look around the courtroom, the clerk there is a agent for the court or the state. So is the judge. She's an agent. So is the prosecutor. They're an agent. If you choose to have a defense attorney, they're also an agent. They're an agent for the court. And lastly, you. So everybody there in the room is acting as an agent. What makes you think you are the odd man out and that you are not also acting as an agent? Yep. Because at the end of the day, the truth is, you are. That is what they're seeing you as.
Yeah, that underlines. I had heard somebody else who did something similar to this type of process, but going in as agent, and they brought up the fact, along the way, that don't you think that the principal here needs to be represented by maybe a public defender? That really, I'm only in here in my limited capacity as agent, and there's no one here defending the principal or their property. Somehow they got the judge or whatever to have assign a public defender. But it was very revealing that when this guy went and talked to the public defender kept saying, "I can't talk to you about this. I don't represent you. I represent the principal."
Exactly.
So the public defender doesn't represent the agent who represents the principal. He goes straight to the named defendant is that all capital letter name trust, that property owned by the principal, the owner, the U.S. government. So he couldn't disclose. He couldn't talk about anything. And he just sat there silent. And the whole case kind of danced around him and it went away. And judges do understand this. I do know there's a guy out there named Popeye. He's got his own channel out there. I heard a little story. It was very interesting that where he got into the court and the judge was not catching on to what was going on. He says, "Well, wait a minute. Why are you in here? This is your name, right?" And he goes, "Wait a minute." He goes, "What do you mean it's my name? I'm not trespassing in someone's property. It's belongs to the government, Social Security Administration." And the judge said, "I don't understand." And he pulls out a Social Security card and he handed it to him. He says, "Let me point out the name and address of the principal on the back of this card." The judge immediately says, "All right, dismiss." He didn't. He knew where that was going, because again, the number one thing is an agent has no liability if they perform their one and foremost forefront duty, which is to notify the principal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And these people do know this. There's attorney gentleman I know, he's retired, and he saw I was reading the law of agency and principal and contract and tort. And he looked at that and he was like, "What are you doing reading that? Nobody reads that for entertainment." He's like, "I haven't seen that book for 50 years since I was in law school."
But believe me, they know it. They know it.
And, something else I was thinking of when you were talking about this situation and mentioning, the things that you didn't bring up, you know what I mean? And there's a very popular short video out there from Kata Gaia, and it's called "Judge Bows to Sovereign." And that got passed around like, "Oh my gosh, something really got accomplished." Well, you didn't see part 2 of that. The judge was actually giving Kata Gaia, whose name is actually Keith Thompson, the judge was giving Keith Thompson an out and a hint and saying, "You are either him or his agent." The judge said that like 3 times, but it never sunk into Keith's skull. And so when the judge went back to chambers, back into what I call the Holy of Holies, he claims, the judge abandoned the court. And of course, just before the judge stepped away, it looked like the judge bowed. Well, guess what? The judge was not bowing to Keith Thompson or the Kata Gaia character or whatever. That is a standard practice in Great Britain. I've got a playlist on the YouTube channel. You can go and find it, where it shows other court situations in Great Britain where they actually do that.
Yeah, I've seen it on your YouTube channel, and that's that. He didn't bow to a sovereign. That's hogwash.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that this line of thinking and this direction is possibly really going to open maybe some more opportunities, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what transpires in the future, Jim.
Yeah, me too. I'm a couple of things, at least in the future, that I'm looking forward to is that, I wonder how many times I have to, usually things happen in 3s. And I'm thinking this might also be the path to get the, what is it? The stars in the computer in the sky, do not arrest, do not detain. I think after doing this a few times, they realize he's not playing the game. We don't want to bring this one in. and do a seminar for everybody in the courtroom is eager to just pay and go. So I'm wondering if it's going to take a few more times, and whatever. You know me. I've spent a few nights in jail, a few weeks in jail over the years, learning. It's part of I guess my street cred. I've done it. I've made the mistakes. I'm eager to point out the mistakes, and if other people have better ways, I can learn from everybody.
I do think that there is something, and from what I've seen in my interactions, I do think that there is something that they put in your information. But I will say it's not a do not detain. Yeah. I know there's a lot of talk out there. It says that you get a do not detain and a lifetime concealed carry license or something like crazy like that. But and I did a lot of time digging into that. And what I found was that there's only a couple different type of people that get on a do not detain list. One is people that are currently under investigation, and so they don't want some other police officer to mess up whatever because they're watching somebody. Or secondly, somebody that's a confidential informant is on a do not detain
ambassador
list. So,
or a foreign ambassador. They have ambassadorial diplomatic immunity.
Yeah, but they don't have full-fledged immunity. I mean, they can still do something that will get them detained. You know what I mean?
Right.
But because if there was a way to get on some sort of secret do not detain list, don't we think that every mobster and drug runner and human trafficker, you name it, would have gotten on that list by now? That information would have been out.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing too is that, it does make me wonder then with this role, if that entity that's theirs has been there for a while, it opens up some questions because I have been in pursuit of the great unicorn, the 4-star passport, and that I haven't seen one yet. I have doubts about a lot of the processes that I've studied about it, but it seems like maybe being recognized as the authorized representative or general agent for that entity, there might be something I can do with the passport again. Not that I'm eager to travel abroad. It's a dangerous time to be, flying around the globe. I'm happy in my in the hills of Georgia, off grid up here. As a matter of fact,
and if anybody does travel abroad, and a travel agent will tell you this today, if you're traveling abroad, tell people you're from Canada. Don't tell people you're from the United States.
Yeah,
we're not looked upon that fondly.
No,
we've gotten known for barging into countries and kicking in doors and acting like terrorists. So
yeah. I ran across that when I was years ago. I think Reagan was president, and so I always had when I went to France, I had the California flag on my backpack because they didn't like Americans, but they loved Californians for some reason. So because they're probably just as socialist as the French were, but otherwise, I didn't want people spitting in my food and that kind of thing. So I shied away from whipping out anything with an American flag on it.
Well, that's where Hollywood's at. That's where all the idols are. That's where the stars are. All right, Jim. Thanks for being here. Awesome info today. Myself, if I were to add anything to what you did, I would say that I probably would have sent notice to the Secretary of State for the state where I live and the state where I was born, because I kind of see them also as being in a principal position, because they're the ones that created the name originally. They created that organization originally. My mom and dad named me Brian Glenn. They didn't name me Brian Glenn Parker. Your mom and dad, they didn't name you your last name. They named you your first middle name. The state goes and tax on that last name. And it's just an obvious thing that people totally overlook.
Yeah, when you combine them together, it makes it their, basically they operate under the assumption it is their property, and you're the surety when you say it's your name.
Absolutely.
But
And, as far as it being your property, I think it's really interesting to study surnames, because surnames fall into one of like three different categories. It may be a surname that is related to the terrain where you live, which is state property, right? Like a hill or rivers or something like that, maybe a surname. Or the surname will be maybe the occupation somebody has. I mean, how many people do you know with the surname of like Baker or Potter? My surname is Parker. Parker is somebody that looks after the state parks and the county parks, Well, or it may be something more like, the surname may be something more like a nickname kind of thing that is attributed to someone's physical demeanor, like the last name of Short, for instance,
Armstrong.
And so, yeah, surnames I find surnames pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. And like I try to remind everybody every time we're here.
Hey, God bless you. God bless all those listening. I hope that the veil is lifted, and do what you will with the information I shared. If you take it to the next level, please get a hold of Brian and share it. We are a community. No one here is operating alone. But as you travel through their valley of dead entities, remember, you don't have to fear evil if you're merely an agent. You have no liability.
That's right. And first and foremost, know who you are, where you're from, and where you're really at, because that's where everybody's been deceived. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. All right. Take care.